This is the second of two bonus episodes for our Season 2 genetics content. And today I just want to share my story about what I found when working with Christian. I like to do this because, first of all, I think it's pretty interesting. And second of all, I just wanted to share kind of not only the findings, but what led me to kind of wake up to this path. So starting off, first, I want to give a little context because this context is important to framing the story. Christian and I have been friends for years, and one of the things we love to do is share notes about how we're feeling somatically in different environments and situations. Now, he is typically more sensitive and intentional about this than I am. So usually this looks like he'll observe something and then ask me to compare to see how I feel. Now, I also should note here, he and I share some Italian background, but he also has Northern and Eastern European, whereas I have Scotch and German. So this has led us to countless conversations about things like EMFs, about hot and cold weather, about different dietary needs, or geographies where we feel most comfortable. Things like sun exposure, regional diets, highlands versus lowlands, tribal versus farmer. So one of the things we discovered was that he and I often have differences or contrasts in how we respond or where we feel best. And then, of course, he's done more careful tracking of what affects him as he's moved across the country. Okay, so what really turned me on to the genetics piece recently is that he and I occasionally will get into almost diametrically opposed states when we're overwhelmed or when we feel out of balance. As my friends know, about twice a year, I'll get into a state where I just really feel like I need to get away. Like I'm just so overstimulated, so oversaturated in my nerves. The message I'm getting is just get away, get away, get away. Now, to an extent, this has been a thing in my whole family. My dad's side especially very much enjoys having peaceful, wide, quiet space away from everyone. Could that be a Scottish farmer type? Maybe. So anyway, I'll occasionally get into these states, and then Christian will cycle through states where he's just very much needing social connection. He can get more agitated. He wants to reach out. And so when I get in my state and he gets in his state, we sort of set each other off. Like he's wanting social friendly connection. I'm wanting to pull away. Neither of us are getting our needs met. And so this sort of happened again last August. I was literally in an isolated cabin in the mountains. I didn't talk to anyone for days. I didn't want to. And I could barely even bring myself to tell them what I needed because I felt guilty about it and I felt ashamed. And yeah, I had a little bit of a piss off feeling as well. Just leave me alone. Typically, this is what I needed once or twice a year to kind of cool off my nervous system and get me back to like functionality, I guess you'd say. But this time, he'd done his genetics exploration and he saw that I was in my state. He wasn't as bad off in his state, so he was able to see it a little more clearly than I was. And he was starting to tell me that I should probably look into the genetics as well. I think what clicked for me was initially just recognizing a certain feeling that we named like, why can't I metabolize stress? That's the phrase I use. That's how it felt. Just felt like when it gets to a certain level, I can't get it out of my system. And I'd always taken this for granted. But this time, for some reason, maybe partly because of Christian's research, partly because of the medicine journey intention, it was like, yeah, this probably isn't good. And it might not have to be this way. And I should probably look into this, And this also required me to get out of this initial psychological attribution and out of the spiritual attribution, like, oh, I just need to calm down and pray more. And out of the kind of reactionary emergency response mode as well. Now, I'm not saying there's not plenty of other environmental reasons that could be going on here, but at the very least, I knew the strength of my reaction was abnormal compared to most people I knew. So, this is the story of what we found so far, coming out of a good friend calling me out and coming out of some self-observation and some curiosity. And I should mention, by the time of this conversation, I had done a 23andMe genome analysis where I downloaded the entire 15 megabyte file and gave it to Christian. So that's where we'll pick up, and here's what he's found.
So I was looking at your genetics, and you carry changes in a gene called CYP21A2, which is called steroid 21 hydroxylase. And what this does is it metabolizes a lot of steroids, well, progesterone specifically being the biggest one, and causes what's called 21 hydroxylase deficiency. Now, these gene changes don't by themselves, like this is like a risk gene change. Like, so if you carry the SNP, you're more likely to have a slower metabolism of progesterone. But this gene needs something called heme to work. So it's a cofactor for this gene. So heme is part of hemoglobin, and we make it in our body. We get it from food. But the most important place we make it is our body. And it's made through this kind of long pathway, but there's 2 or 3 pretty important cofactor for enzymes in it that control the amount of heme we make. Riboflavin is one, zinc is another, and B6 is the third. I think riboflavin is one. I have to look, but so we'll leave riboflavin for off now. But I definitely know B6 and zinc are 2 that you need to make heme. So the important thing about this gene is that it's very important in stress, because what it does is it turns progesterone, which is made from cholesterol. So cholesterol turns into progesterone, and then progesterone, through this CYP21A2 gene, it turns into cortisol and aldosterone. Now, cortisol is associated with stress, but it's kind of misunderstood, because what it does is it calms down our stress. So it's
basically manages it. Like there's stress is up, and so the cortisol is correlated with that, but actually it may be having a regulatory effect.
Yeah, what it does, it calms our body down. Like, so you get. I like to think of this. I like to think of cortisol as the mother soothing the child. It's almost like this gene makes you unable to self soothe yourself. Like you're not producing the cortisol to give you the comfort and the anti-inflammatory and the things you need. Like, I mean, they literally give people, like, I think you were bringing up, you're having some allergies today. Well, this is, they give these steroids to people who have allergies for a reason, because it calms the allergies down. Um, uh, it's an anti-inflammatory. It's related to stress, because when we're stressed, we're going to produce more inflammatory things. But after a while, since you need heme to make it, and since you need B6 and zinc to make it, if you lose any of those things, you're not going to be able to do that. And so that's why one of the first things I wanted to get tested with you to see what was going on, because I know someone else with these same changes in this gene, and they were very low in B6. And so I wanted to have you check your homocysteine, which is very important. If you're low in B6, you'll usually be high in homocysteine, and your B6, of course, I wanted to test, and a few other things.
At this point, I agreed to get some blood work done. So when I was visiting my friend in Texas, I signed up for 5 different tests, which included B6 and homocysteine, along with a complete blood cell panel, iron, and ferritin. Based on my genetics, Christian had predicted low B6 and high homocysteine, and he wanted to check my CBC for a baseline and the iron and ferritin to see if that indicated anything about heme. I got these tests done at a LabCorp, but there's also walk-in lab, and sometimes your doctor will also do these on your behalf on request. If you've never looked what's available in these private labs, I was really impressed and surprised, because there are dozens upon dozens of tests I've never even heard of, and I didn't even know were possible. So if you ever do get some of these done, These labs are all over the country and are fairly inexpensive for some of the tests. And they advertise that the visit can be very short, although mine lasted about 90 minutes because of the wait time. After getting the test, it just took 1 or 2 days to get the results, which is emailed to you. And then I sent them over to Christian, and let's check out the analysis.
Sure enough, we found out that while your B6 wasn't low, it was on the low end, but B6 is tricky because when they measure serum B6, they're not measuring only the active form. They're measuring the active form, which is P5P, and they're also measuring a couple of other inactive forms. And some of the inactive forms are bound with other proteins and they just don't work anymore. So it's hard to get a good reading, but generally I would say if someone's on the lower end and their homocysteine was high and your homocysteine was pretty high,
Mm-hmm.
it was 17 with 14 being over the other
Yeah,
end.
it was flagged
Like
for sure.
Yeah. And so getting back to the steroid hormone and the cofactor heme, and knowing that B6 is needed to make heme and heme is a cofactor for this enzyme, I could see a pattern. So your action of withdrawing during times of stress, like, is associated with this. If you can't deal with the situation because you're not making the cortisol, the only thing for you to do is to get out of the situation, and that's a normal unhealthy response.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, it's normal response.
Yep.
If you don't have, the right, if you can't metabolize the progesterone into cortisol. And so, that's kind of like what the pattern I'm seeing in people who have this. There are people who, who are, if they're depressed or upset, I don't hear from them. Like, and I reach out to them, and all these things are just signs of being heme deficient when you have the polymorphisms that you have in that CYP21A2 gene. I'm going to read out the SNP number in this gene.
Okay.
So people can look it up. It's called RS 125-30380. And it's linked to 21 hydroxylase deficiency with adrenal hyperplasia. Now, this is only one SNP in the gene, so you might have this one SNP and not have this totally bad, like 21 hydroxylase deficiency.
21 hydroxylase deficiency. That's hydroxylase helps to continue the metabolic pathway of cholesterol through progesterone and into cortisol,
to
right?
Cortisol, correct.
So
yeah.
that would imply a potential inability to produce sufficient cortisol, right?
Yes. Yeah. And if I see someone has this gene and they're showing symptoms of low cortisol, the first thing I would want to see is a cortisol test, because two things can happen. This is where it gets a little tricky, because you can get a cortisol test and have this and have high cortisol. And that would tell me that you have a pretty severe B6 deficiency, because to get rid of cortisol, you need another enzyme that uses B6 directly as a cofactor. So you can see it's kind of a balancing act in the body, like, of all these things where you can do a lab test. And because I know someone who has this and they definitely have low cortisol, but they got their cortisol and their cortisol was super high. And I was like, why did that happen? It was both unexpected to us. But then I know this is a person whose B6 was 3 and is severely deficient. Doctors don't care about it for some reason. But then I looked, I'm like, well, what are the genes that get rid of cortisol? And surely enough, the next gene that gets rid of cortisol is B6 dependent. So her B6 deficiency was not only decreasing the amount of cortisol she was making, but whatever cortisol she made, she kept around. So that's where the term adrenal fatigue comes in, because you actually get cortisol resistant. So in terms of a point, you get so much cortisol, it doesn't even work anymore, because your body, you have receptors for cortisol like you have for everything else.
And they're like,
they just don't
off.
care about it anymore. Yeah, they're like, I've had enough of this. And so it's weird that people with adrenal fatigue can either have low cortisol or high cortisol. like it's a beautiful, perfect balancing act in the body we have, but I think it just goes too far. Sometimes when you have really bad deficiencies, you get to the point of exhaustion because you're never correcting the deficiency. So you have someone with depression who has, you know, stress is a big trigger for depression. So stressed people get depression. Instead of saying, well, let's check their nutrition, they say, oh, let's put you on Prozac. Well, that's not fixing the pathway at all. It might make them feel better a little bit, because B6 is also crucial for making serotonin and dopamine. And so that's why the Prozac and stuff work. So, but again, it never gets to the underlying cause.
At this point, I was really excited. Something was telling me I was on the right track, not just intellectually, but my whole body was vibrating, almost like a bell or a light bulb had gone off. I was reminded back to the dream work episode when Carrie mentioned when the dream analysis clicks, something just feels like an aha moment. And I was definitely getting that here with Christian. Ultimately, we did decide to try some B6 P5P supplement for me.
So yeah, like this is the beginning of like the discovery for you. Like if you're taking the B6 and you take the B6 for a while and you feel better, then there's nothing really more to do, like but if you take it for a while and you feel better and then you feel worse, then, it might be time to start, looking at some of these other factors in that cycle, because you could be fine on B12 and you could be fine on, we didn't do a B12 test, did we? No. We do, yeah. That's things like we maybe can do in the future. Like, I know you're going away for like a month. That's perfect, because after a month, then maybe we can do a B12 and methylmalonic acid test, and that will give us a good measure of the B12. But yeah, so that's where I guess that's the discovery point we're at now. We're like, I just think of like all the trials and error I went through, and I'm glad I can possibly get some more insight in doing this in a manner that I didn't have to go through, because doing this in a more controlled setting, before I even knew the genetics, I was trying supplements and stuff and having reactions and being like, why did that work? Why did that? But I didn't know the science, even how vitamins worked. Like when I first started this, I didn't know, like people don't know. People say, oh, you need vitamins. Well, why do you need vitamins? What are they used for? You ask people that. I don't know. They're needed because and so I was at that same point, and then I discovering these things, but it was all just trial and error for the longest time. But now I think I feel like I have this, this method of thinking about it, that's more streamlined, especially with the genetics. Like pairing genetics and symptoms is so valuable for me in looking at how nutrition and environment can help with, with health issues, brain, physical, anything. So
one of the key things you've taught me that I've gotten more clear about is really just noticing your own feeling of well-being. And it staggers me how long I've gone, years, and I'm sure everyone goes years, and most people, if it doesn't get acute, it's just you learn to live with how you feel, your background sense of feeling. And that's just, I was like, I guess that's how it is, and you were like, dude, like, that may be like, there could just be other stuff going on. It doesn't have to be like that, at least maybe get curious about whether it has to be like that or not.
That's awesome. Yeah. There are so many people, like even I was like this, like there were feelings I had that I thought everybody had, and it was the times I didn't have them that woke me up. If you almost think of illness as a hallucination of
Yes,
normality. Yeah.
it is. Yeah.
And so people are living in a hallucination, their whole life. It takes something happening to make them understand that they have hallucinations, and they have to double check whether their reality is real. And so I think people need to do that with their illness. Like, is this real? Is this how I'm really supposed to be seeing the world or feeling the world, let's say? understanding your genetics helps you understand what environment you need. You're not going to turn into a different person. You're just going to be a healthier person, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you're still, going to need this environment that may be more like less stimulating, and more calm, and avoiding people like me who are agitators. I'm an agitator.
Agitator. I'm a sedator.
Yeah, yeah. The agitator and the sedator. I think that's the name for this episode.
I'm down. I'm down.
Yeah.
Print
Good.
it.
Cut.
So that's the end of the conversation, but not the end of the story. What happened? Well, actually, I obtained some P5P with 50 milligram tablets and began taking it. Interestingly, what happened is the first night I could not sleep after 3 a.m. I woke up with racing thoughts, full of energy. So I mentioned this to Christian and he said, "Oh, okay, let's pull it back and cut the tablet in half and take one every 2 days." So I did that, and some very profound and unexpected things happened. First of all, I felt a more consistent energy level throughout the day in a way that felt normal to me. Just like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to feel like, just in the body, slow burn on the energy, not spikes and valleys, which I previously attributed to being like, oh, I have some Italian blood. I'm going to be fiery and then down. I'm going to be up and down a little bit more. So the contrast between the ups and the downs were pretty dramatic. And now they feel more rounded, they feel more grounded, and they feel correct. In a way, it's also subtle because it's not like I'm a different person. It's not like I have different interests, different expressions of personality, none of that. It's just sort of like, oh, this feels right. I feel good. I feel right. So I'm still taking the supplements. This is actually months after beginning. And I've learned now how to sort of self-regulate the amount that I take. I've learned how to feel when I have a certain agitation creeping in that reminds me of how I used to feel. And I know whether to do half a pill, whether to do a full one sometimes. And it's sometimes every couple days. It's sometimes every 4 or 5 days. And so I feel like I sort of have it dialed in to my ability to recognize somatically what is being called for. To me, it's a success story. So where do we leave off? To me, this is a very powerful tool in the toolkit. Do I think it's everything? Absolutely not. Do I think there's environmental factors? Do I think I need more exercise to help get those endorphins? Do I think dietary adjustments would help? Of course. I think medicine journey still has a long way to go. But I think this is a way of looking at things that to me was very new. And I think it's a very, I would say, critically important approach because we're all wired so differently. And especially in the US, people coming from so many different backgrounds, moving around a lot, and starting to understand or at least be open to the possibility that where we are, where we eat, might or might not accord with our genetic background. Or, mutations or polymorphisms that have occurred. Of course, I should mention this is not a recommendation to go out and get some B6 because this is very customized to what I need. There are as many vitamins on the shelf as there are days of the year, at least. So you can do this as little or as far as you would like. As we wrap this month's genetics content, I think I have 2 main takeaways. First is to consider your genetic background. Would you come from tribal situations, village life, farming life? Where do your genes come from and what did those people eat? How much sun exposure did they get? What kinds of terrain? while this may not prove everything, and I also think humans are very adaptable, it also may indicate ways you can start to play around with variables you can control. The other thing I would say is to just pay attention to your somatic feeling. Is it not enough energy? Is it too agitated? Does it feel unease? And start questioning why that is. We take them as a given, but they might not be. And that's really what a medicine journey is about. There has to be recognition and a willingness to think through causes and try out new ways to bring ourselves into better alignment. I'm also reminded back to when we started the season, mentioning how so many ancient traditions discussed maintaining or restoring balance. And in a lot of ways, that's what Christian has discovered as well, but on a genetic and enzymatic basis. So I'll see you next month when we're going to look at the relationship of spiritual awakening with healing. Until then, mind your G's, A's, T's, and C's.